I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Trump Watch, the show that y'all know keeps a watch on President Trump, reports to you as to what he's been doing during the past week, especially with respect to the destructions of the rights and the well-being of the American people, and just provides a little bit of commentary. And so we might as well start with that great, big, beautiful bill that President Trump is trying to get enacted through Congress. It's a spending bill, but it's more than a beautiful spending bill. It's a beautiful, massive spending bill. I don't understand. I thought President Trump was running for office this time around on the importance of reducing government spending, abolishing departments and agencies, balanced budget. Don't you often hear that from Republicans? Balanced budget. Put us in power and we'll balance the budget. We promise. And of course, every time people fall for it, it's really kind of funny. In fact, another funny aspect of this whole thing is Congressman Tom Massie from Kentucky, that he's been objecting to this bill because it's like massive, out of control spending and debt too. It's they're estimating that the national debt, the federal government's debt, will be increased by $3 trillion over the next 10 years. That's just pure nonsense. If they're saying $3 trillion, they're talking $6 trillion. So we're already at what, $37 trillion in federal debt, and that debt's got to be paid at some point. The interest on that debt, get this, now exceeds the amount that Trump is giving the Pentagon. And Trump is over there, just bowing to the national security state. He's given them $1 trillion. This is on top of course, the big parade, the military parade in D.C. That costs several millions of dollars. But what's a few million here and a few million there, And what's important is that Trump, catered to the military-industrial complex. I mean, whatever happened to draining the deep state? The deep state is the national security state. The Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. I don't see any talk about abolishing the CIA, do you? Or the NSA? Or downsizing the military? It's the exact opposite. He's giving them more money. And then honoring them with a military parade. I mean, I felt like I was in the Soviet Union or North Korea when that parade was being held. I mean, okay, there is no question but that the national security branch of the government is the most powerful branch. As I've long maintained that they're running the show, at least in foreign affairs. The Supreme Court will always defer to them without fail. That's why that Guantanamo Bay is still there. A totally unconstitutional judicial system there, military tribunals, torture people into making confessions. I mean, totally in violation of every principle of due process that the Bill of Rights has. And but the Supreme Court's just left it there, you see, because that's the national security branch. And they're the most powerful branch, as I've long maintained. They're in charge. And I'm not the only one. I've long recommended this book by Michael Glennon, professor of law at Tufts University, former counsel to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, not a quack. And his thesis in his book, National Security and Double Government, which I wish every American would read, is that it is the national security branch of the government that's in charge. And that the other three branches, the congressional branch, which they effectively control. I mean, there's no question about that. But the Supreme Court defers to him, and then the president. I mean, a lot of people are convinced that President Trump ordered that bombing of Iran. I don't believe it for a second. I think it's the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA that call that. But they let Trump have the veneer of power, like he's the one that ordered the bombing. I don't believe it. It's the national security branch of the government that is running this government. And they're the ones that have long wanted regime change in Iran, long before Trump came into office. Ever since that 1979 revolution where the Iranian people had the audacity to remove the U.S. installed puppet, the Shah of Iran, which the CIA had installed in their coup in 1953 when they destroyed Iran's democratic system. They've had it out for the Iranian people. They've never forgiven them for getting rid of the Shah. You don't do that to the empire. And so they've always wanted regime change in Iran. They still want regime change in Iran. We're not finished with Iran yet. I guarantee you that. That once they get their mindset on regime change and installing a new U.S. puppet, they don't lose it. I mean, it's there. And so the Iranian people have suffered under sanctions for, gosh, I don't know, since 1979, I believe. And they continue under Trump. Brutal sanctions that are designed to target the Iranian people with starvation, with impoverishment. I mean, I remember many years ago reading articles where the Iranian middle class were devastated. They were having to sell their household goods, their personal effects, things that were valuable to them that they had accumulated over their lifetimes, but they needed to survive. So they started selling these things because of the sanctions. The sanctions are designed to target the citizenry of a country in the hopes that they will rise up and cause a revolution that will then satisfy the U.S. empire by putting in a U.S. dictator. And then I guarantee you the sanctions would be lifted immediately. So in any event, you've got this massive spending bill that is going to be adding trillions of dollars onto the debt, whose interest is now exceeding what's being given to the Pentagon. This cannot end well. And it just makes no sense to me. Trump had the real opportunity to do meaningful structural change. The debt ceiling, for example, he could have said and should have said, we are not raising this debt ceiling, period. Okay, well, I mean, sure, they would have had all the Chicken Little saying, oh, no, default, Jacob. Well, that's what they say every time. But as soon as it works and they raise the debt ceiling again, everybody goes and has a drink and starts laughing that they pulled it off again. And then for the next 3 or 4 years, nobody ever says, hey, maybe we ought to start reducing federal spending instead of adding on to the debt because the debt ceiling's coming due, because everybody knows they'll just play the same game over and over again. Oh, the default, Jacob, default. So Trump had a chance to say, no, we've got a ceiling. That's the ceiling. The ceiling is set there for a purpose so that no new debt will be incurred. And then at that point, federal officials would have had to live within their means. No more borrowing. It would have been a cash pay-as-you-go system, which would have meant they would have had to make major slashes in federal spending. But that's what Republicans have always said they want when they're out of power. Oh, they'll rail against the out-of-control Democrats on spending and debt, and boy, elect us and we'll balance the budget and all this nonsense. They had a chance to do that with the debt ceiling debate. But instead, Trump either wants to get rid of the debt ceiling, or he wants to raise it to, several trillions of dollars, which means more trillions of dollars onto the national debt. It's just crazy. It makes no sense unless my thesis is correct. If my thesis or Glennon's thesis is correct, it's the national security branch of the government that's running the show. And so Trump has to, if that's the case, Trump has to defer to them. He has to defer to the deep state that he railed against while he was campaigning. And my hunch is that Trump is counting on the military to obey orders in the event he has to declare another national emergency, and he needs to deploy troops to American cities. We've already seen him do it once with L.A. We've seen him send troops to the border, which of course Biden did too. So now on the border you've got a militarized police state instead of just a police state. But these are all national emergencies, and you can see the courts, they defer. They defer because they know the national security branch of the government's involved. They're always going to defer when there's ever any hint that the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA are concerned. So let's assume that there's some major retaliatory strike because of U.S. support for the Israeli government and its operations in Gaza. Don't forget that the U.S. continues to furnish the Israeli government with brand new state-of-the-art weaponry that they use to kill people in Gaza and elsewhere in Iran and so forth. And that produces a lot of anger, a lot of hatred toward not just the Israeli government, but toward the United States. And so it's what we said before the 9/11 attacks. We're now back to the same point where Americans are facing the prospect of a major terrorist strike on American soil. I mean, I don't even think American tourists, like in Europe or especially the Middle East, are safe, because what people do over there in their anger is they conflate America, the nation, with the federal government, the U.S. government. Actually, it's two separate entities. But the U.S. government doesn't conflates it also, when they say, oh, we this and we that. So tourists in Europe or the Middle East are at risk, American tourists. And even the U.S. government is saying that people need to take caution. And this is a classic way of where U.S. foreign policy, this interventionist foreign policy, even if it's just furnishing weaponry to a foreign regime, it makes it very, very dangerous for the American people. It makes us unsafe. And then it also costs us our freedom here at home, because now they have to destroy freedom here at home to keep us safe from the people that they themselves are inciting. So it's just, it feeds on itself. Foreign interventionism then causes you to lose your liberty here at home, not to mention the fact that they got to spend gobs of money to replace all that weaponry for the Israeli government that's being used up. And then this bombing of Iran, it makes people angry. And this is what we were saying before 9/11, that we said, if you keep killing people in Iraq, because at that point the targeted nation was Iraq, and they were killing gobs of Israeli people, especially children, with their sanctions, their brutal sanctions. And they were also supporting the Israeli government, and they had troops in the Islamic Holy Lands. And it was all a prescription for really anger and hatred. And we kept saying, if you keep doing this, you're going to get a major attack on U.S. soil. And, of course, nobody paid attention, or at least U.S. officials didn't pay attention. And then they get the 9/11 attacks, and what do they say? Oh, no, Jacob, that didn't have anything to do with it at all. Not foreign interventions. They just hate us for our freedom and values. And then that was where we got all the anti-Muslim sentiment, and the Sharia law was coming to Americans, and the caliphate was going to be established. And I don't know whatever happened to all those fears of the caliphate, the Sharia law and stuff. But then we get the Patriot Act, and we get the TSA at the airport. They destroyed, airport travel as far as being a pleasurable experience. Who likes going over there and being subjected to searches by government officials? Then you get the illegal surveillance schemes. And so, in other words, they destroy liberty at home because of U.S. foreign interventionism. And now we're facing the same prospect. And I guarantee you that if we get a terrorist attack here, like with a drone attack, maybe on multiple cities on the same day or something, I guarantee you Trump's going to use that as an opportunity to declare a national emergency. And if we've already seen that he has a propensity with respect to immigration to attack habeas corpus and due process of law, and if he uses that type of an emergency to suspend habeas corpus and due process of law, we're talking about troops being deployed across America. And my hunch is that that's what he's counting on, is that troops obey his orders, don't question the constitutionality, and they won't. Troops don't question. Their loyalty is to the president. Yes, I know they take an oath to support and defend the Constitution, but they never question orders. You can see that in the invasion of Iraq, or the attack on Iran. That's an act of war. When you start dropping bombs on a foreign country, you are now waging war. And those pilots didn't say, Mr. President, I can't go and attack Iran. That's an unconstitutional order that you just issued. There's no declaration of war from Congress. The Constitution requires that. Not one of those pilots said, as far as I know. And they dropped those bombs. And I don't see any soldiers, officers, generals, colonels, whatever, even lieutenants saying, hey, this is unconstitutional. I don't want to be part of this. Everybody obeys orders, and if they don't obey orders, they're kicked out, and they're quickly replaced. And the message is sent to everybody: this is what's going to happen to you if you don't obey orders. And so that's the risk we're facing now. That's the same old risk before 9/11, but it's a graver risk, because I think Trump would use it as an opportunity not just to have a new Patriot Act or more people at the airport, TSA agents. I think he'd use it as a way to declare a national emergency and demand or just take omnipotent-like powers, totalitarian-like powers, like suspending habeas corpus or due process of law. So, time will tell, but now's the time that we need to be aware of this. And that, of course, that gets us back to the importance of civil liberties, and especially the two most important civil liberties are habeas corpus and due process of law. We lose those, and there's a good chance we're not going to get them back. It's like gun rights. Once people surrender their guns, they're not going to make the mistake a second time because the government's not going to let them have a second time because they're not going to give them back their guns so they can make the mistake a second time. And it's the same thing with habeas corpus and due process. All right, so let's see what else is going on this week. Well, one of the funniest reactions that Republicans have had is to this nomination of this socialist in New York City, Zoran Madani, who calls himself a socialist, and there's no question that's what he is. He's going to do all this free stuff, free bus rides, and he's going to control rents in New York. I'm not sure whether he's going to do rent control or not, but it wouldn't surprise me if he did more rent control there. And let's see he's going to tax the rich to give to the poor, standard stuff, socialist stuff. And the Republicans are over there mocking and ridiculing this, and including the big hedge fund people who are the millionaires in Wall Street, who are ones going to be taxed to pay for all the freebies. Classic socialism, from each according to his ability to each according to need. I mean, that's the whole idea, taking money from people to whom it belongs and giving it to people to whom it does not belong. Classic Cuban models, North Korean model, and so forth of socialism. And but the Republicans are over there mocking and ridiculing. What the Republicans don't realize is that they're just as socialist as this guy is. I mean, they're big supporters of Social Security. They don't call it Social Security for nothing. It's a classic socialist program. Medicare, Medicaid, school vouchers. Oh, big supporters of school vouchers. That's a socialist program that takes money from people to whom it belongs and gives it to people to whom it does not belong. Let's see. Public schooling itself. They're big believers in the Federal Reserve System. I mean, to paraphrase the old saying, I forget who it was. It said that we're all Keynesians now. We're all socialists now. Okay, well, not all of us. Some of us still strictly adhere to libertarian principles. But it is kind of funny to watch Republicans rail against socialism when they're right there with the socialists. Minimum wage laws. I think this guy's probably a big favor of increasing the minimum wage out the gazoo. And the only difference between that and the Republican position is the Republicans say, well, no, we don't want to increase it as much, or it should stay the same. But you never see Republicans talking about abolishing the minimum wage. It's always, the amount that it should be set at. So, it's kind of a humorous aspect to this whole, out of control federal spending and debt. And, I probably should mention also that part of the problem behind Trump's great big beautiful spending bill is that the money any money he's saving, like on, DOGE and USAID and Department of Education, whatever happened to abolishing the Department of Education? I mean, why didn't Trump asked Congress to enact a bill to abolish the Department of Education? Now, you may say, the Democrats wouldn't have allowed it. Well, at least you send a message saying this is what we want to do. I don't see any bill being enacted to abolish the Department of Education. But any money that DOGE saved in those things, the big USAID controversy, was far outweighed by the additional money that's being spent on immigration enforcement and on the military. So what good does it do to save some money over here if you're going to spend more money over here? And of course, all the raids and the deportations and going into restaurants and Home Depot and grabbing these people who really have just carved out a way of life in which they're sustaining their families and through voluntary, mutual, beneficial, consensual relationships with others. and going after these people. Notice something important about all these raids, though. As far as I know, I haven't seen one single raid at a welfare office. Okay, now isn't that what the immigration control advocates are always saying? They're coming to get on welfare, Jacob. They're coming to get on welfare. Okay, well then why don't you go to the welfare office and stand there and bust them as they're getting their welfare? You see, because they know it's a lie, and it's been a lie from the very beginning. These people that are coming here are coming to work, and that's why the raids are at places. Duh. Okay, you go to where the people are if you want to arrest them, and you go to places of work. You don't go to the welfare offices because they're not there at the welfare offices. It's all been a sham, just like this whole thing of, oh, they're all criminals, Jacob, they're all criminals. I mean, somebody needs to tell those million Americans that have retired in Mexico that they're living in a country that's filled with robbers and rapists and murderers and so forth, because apparently they don't know it. That the whole country's filled with them, and they're just trying to get into the United States so they can come and rob us and kill us and so forth. I mean, isn't it ironic that we live under the most powerful government in history? Nobody can deny that. We got the biggest, most powerful government in history, and we got the scaredest people in the world. I mean, and nobody can deny that Americans, at least most Americans, are the most frightened people in the world. They're frightened of everything, their own shadow. They're frightened of the illegal immigrants. They're coming to get them. Oh, Jacob, they're coming. The invaders are coming, Jacob. I know they're coming to get me. I mean, I know one guy he lives in, I think, Wyoming or Montana, way up there. He is convinced that the illegals are coming to get him. I'm convinced that he sits in his basement with his gun waiting for the invaders to come and get him. It's so ludicrous. But he's scared to death. He lives in total fear. He's a very frightened man. And then the Russians, the big fear of the Russians. The Russians, as soon as they finish with Ukraine, okay, they're coming to get us for sure. They're going to sweep across Eastern Europe, Western Europe, England, South America, and work their way up. Yeah, sure. And then the Chinese, they can easily just cross the ocean, Pacific Ocean. They're going to invade San Francisco anytime soon. And then, let's see, what else? Terrorists. Always the big bugaboo, the terrorists. I mean, that's why Bukele, that clownish dictator in El Salvador, where Trump's been sending immigrants and might even send Americans has his terrorism confinement center. You see, every tin-pot dictator knows that terrorism is the big bugaboo. Oh, you just mentioned terrorism, and everybody goes ballistic. And so he's got his terrorism confinement center. And they all do, all these little tin-pot dictators. Because terrorism is the big bugaboo, the boogeyman. Everybody's afraid of the terrorists. The whole war on terrorism, that's what it's all about. Oh, Jacob, we got to declare war on terrorism. Oh, I mean, the communists, don't forget the communists, the whole Cold War thing. But the communists are still with us. There's communists in Vietnam. I started saying North Vietnam, but it's all Vietnam now, all communists, North Korea communists, Cuba communists, and China communists. So, the communists are still coming to get us. Everybody should still be afraid of that. And Iran, the mushroom clouds are going to appear anytime now. So there's a lot of things to be scared of. Drug dealers. But it's ironic that Americans are so frightened. They live lives in such fear, and so they're willing to surrender their liberties at a moment's notice. Speaking of Cuba, Trump just announced that he's strengthening the embargo. National security requires it, of course. I mean, national security is everything. In a national security state, national security is everything. And I don't think it's Trump that's strengthening this embargo. I think, again, it's the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. They run the show when it comes to Cuba. And like Iran, they've never forgiven the Cuban people for going with a communist regime. They had their puppet in there, Batista, brutal dictator, brutal guy. And the Cuban people said, we've had enough. I mean, this guy was bad news. And so they take over in a revolution. The Pentagon and the CIA have never forgiven them. I mean, that's what the Bay of Pigs was all about, Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, is what the assassination of President Kennedy was all about. That Kennedy was going to make peace with Cuba. He was going to dismantle the embargo. And they've had this embargo, which is really just a brutal form of sanctions, since, I don't know, 59, 60, that long. Why? Again, they target the Cuban people with impoverishment, with death by starvation, in the hopes that they'll oust their communist regime and put in another Batista. That's what this is all about. The notion that Cuba poses a threat to U.S. national security is, no matter what term, meaning you put to that ridiculous term, national security, is ridiculous. Cuba's never attacked the United States. In the long sordid history of relations between these two nations, the U.S. and the national security branch of the government has always been the aggressor. State-sponsored assassinations. I mean, that was one of the transformative events of becoming a national security state, where the U.S. acquired the power to assassinate people, kill people without due process of law in violation of the Bill of Rights. But again, remember, the Supreme Court's not going to enforce the Bill of Rights against the national security establishment. They're in charge. And so you've got, they invaded Cuba. That's why they got mad at Kennedy, because Kennedy at the Cuban Missile Crisis agreed that the Pentagon and the CIA would no longer be permitted to invade Cuba. They believed that was a grave threat to national security, a communist regime 30 miles away. And then Kennedy achieved this massive breakthrough that enabled him to see that the whole Cold War was a racket. He was going to end it. And that's what made him a grave threat to national security. In fact, on the day he was assassinated, he had an emissary having lunch with Fidel Castro, with the idea that we're gonna put this adverse relationship to bed, to rest. Kennedy said in his peace speech at American University, "Hey, look, we have different ideologies, but that doesn't mean we have to go to war against each other." But they're now strengthening this. I think that the national security establishment, just my opinion, told Trump, we need you to strengthen this embargo, because the Cuban people are really desperately in desperate straits right now. I mean, really bad shape. And so the national security establishment sees this and says, aha, now we got him. Now we can start causing more death by starvation in Cuba. And then we'll get our revolution after all these decades. Well, it's not going to happen. When people are starving to death, they're not going to revolt. Usually they're going to die, and especially when there's gun control. They don't have guns. All right, so let's see what else. Well, there's been an interesting thing where the Supreme Court's deferring to the Trump administration with respect to the denial of injunctive relief, nationwide injunctions that the Trump issues an executive order, which is like a decree law. He doesn't go to Congress, raise tariffs. He just issues the order. Hey, I'm going to raise tariffs today. Oh, no, I'll lower them tomorrow. Oh, no, I just changed my mind again. I'm going to raise them again. It's all by executive decree laws. He's raising taxes on the American people without going to Congress and asking them to enact taxes on the American people. And he does it by decree law, but in any event, with respect to some of the measures he's taken through executive decree with immigrants, federal judges were declaring it unconstitutional and would issue an injunction across the board, all across the country, saying you cannot enforce this decree law. And the Supreme Court said, no, we're not going to let you do that to the federal judges. In other words, all the millions of people that he's affecting, or hundreds of thousands, each has to bring his own lawsuit. And he can't just do a nationwide injunction, which of course means that if somebody doesn't hire a lawyer right quick and doesn't get into court right away, he finds himself there in El Salvador in the terrorism confinement center, where he's going to be tortured and held indefinitely for the rest of his life, possibly, all without being convicted of a crime or to some brutal third world country. So another example of where the Supreme Court defers to a certain extent to the national security establishment. It's not that they're running the immigration control system directly, but there's no question about where they stand on it. Let's see. What else? Trump's also issued an executive order requiring truckers to know English. Well, you know where that's going to be heading. They're going to be stopping every Mexican American or every Latino truck driver in the world as an excuse to see what they can do to stop him from earning a living by just asking him questions about, what do you understand about English? Um, you know, people are doing fine driving, understanding what they need to understand. You know, they don't need to understand the whole English language to be able to drive a vehicle. Um, People learn what they need to learn. This is the beauty of a free market system in order to sustain their lives and do their jobs. Um, like in my hometown of Laredo, Texas, I'd estimate like 20% of the population can't speak English. I mean, this is one of the residues of having absorbed the entire northern half of Mexico in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. People thought, oh, well, this is going to go away after a century. No, it doesn't go away. When you absorb the entire northern half of a country, there's going to be repercussions for the next many centuries. It's just not going to go away, and we can see that in all of this immigration control system, this socialist system. So people don't speak English in Laredo, but they get by. They understand that they have to sustain their lives in some way, and that they get by with speaking Spanish all of their lives. But Trump feels it is necessary to go after these Spanish-speaking people. In any event, that's my report for this week, and thank you all for tuning in. Thanks for your support of FFF. And I look forward to giving you another report next week. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for your great support.